welcome to They Live by Film, a film discussion podcast focusing on the Criterion Channel and beyond. My name is Adam Lundy, and I am joined as always by my co-hosts Chris Haskell and Zach Bryant. How are you doing today, guys?
Doing good. How are you?
I am great. And Chris, how are you, my friend?
Hey, doing really well. I don't know if I was trying to think if there's a theme for this week because we've done tooth extraction and then COVID survival. So I think this is just a regular.
No, there is a theme. You weren't here. Me and Zach were talking about it. This is
What is it?
This is COVID Survival Part 2, Electric Boogaloo, because I had to go get a COVID test today. I got my nose tickled by a very friendly nurse. Yeah, I've been off sick the last couple of weeks, or a couple of days, and just with a sore throat, nothing major. And my doctor said I had to go get a test before I can get signed off to go back to work. So, yeah, that was it. I had to get a test today, but I'll be very surprised if it comes back anything other than negative.
Wait, so if you didn't get the test, you would not have to go back to work?
Yeah, technically, I suppose. But
they get actual time off in other countries, Chris.
Yeah.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah, it's part of like this COVID sick leave. It's like special for this. If you suspect you have COVID, you're essentially not allowed to go back to work until you've been sort of cleared. You've gotten a negative test and everything like that.
Well, yeah, I would be tempted to go do like a movie run or something and then claim that I was feeling better once I finished. But good on you for doing the right thing.
So before we talk about today's films, we actually have a very bit of exciting news. Like COVID-19, They Live by Film has gone viral. We launched our website this week, theylivebyfilm.com, where you can find all the episodes of the podcast. They're going to be uploaded there every 2 weeks, the same way they are, posted on the normal streaming sites. But also, you're going to be able to get a bit more in-depth look at our thought process and how we view film. Because we're going to be posting up reviews of films that we've seen and ones that we're not even going to be necessarily talking about in the podcasts. There's going to be new reviews going up every day, at least sort of 2 or 3 pretty much every day of reviews for films that we've been watching. So yeah, check it out, theylivebyfilm.com. It's live now, and yeah, you won't regret it. So we'll crack into the first film, now that we got our shameless plug out of the way. So the first film, which I think is going to be really fun to discuss, despite it not being very fun to watch, was Fat Girl. So Fat Girl, for the uninitiated among us, it is a French film from 2001 directed by someone who I don't really know a lot about her, but I've read that she's a very controversial director. Her name is Catherine Breillat. I can't really pronounce her French name. But just to give you the basic rundown on Fat Girl, the synopsis from IMDb is 2 sisters confront their sexual attitudes and experiences while on a family holiday. That is a massive understatement of what happens in this film. And I think we're going to get a lot of different views. I know when we did the discussion on Reddit about this film, there was a lot of conflicting views on how to view this, just in terms of its artistic merits versus exploitation versus Zach's displeasure of the film. I'm going to start with you, Zach, because obviously I read your review earlier today, and there was one line that killed me in it. Before I get you to actually display your thoughts for it, I just want to ask you a really quick question: is Fat Girl your Images? Is this going to be your meme film?
Yeah, I'm gonna bring this film up in every episode if possible.
Oh, fantastic! If this is your first episode, I am well known for hating the film Images by Robert Altman, and I bring it up whenever I can because it's a terrible, terrible movie. So I'm glad to hear this is going to be added to the list of movies that we don't bring up in fear of backlash. But yeah, look, let's just take your raw thoughts on this one, Zach.
Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and start with what I thought was good about the film. I appreciated that it looked like a movie. It was successful in that, and the acting was pretty decent. Okay, well, I'm finished there. So let me talk about why this film does not work for me at all. So obviously with the film, you talked about these teenage girls exploring their sexuality, their they're going through they've obviously going through the puberty, the terrible, terrible teenage phase we've all been through. None of it's interesting. Like I am, there is so much they could do here. Like I'll go into the, my first example because I don't know if we're going to spoil the end of this or not.
Oh yeah, we have to. Like we can't. Talk about this
Okay. So I'm free with spoilers. So the first thing is that a big theme I think of this film is talking about how abuse kind of comes in different forms and how it can appear to come from a loving place, and obviously by the end of the film, a very hateful place. But the problem is, and I have no problem with the lack of subtlety, but this is one of those cases where I think it's kind of needed. Like you're trying to inform people that there's this abuse, but let's look at the first example where you have the 20-year-old Italian guy. What's his name? Fernando?
I think that's Fernando. Yeah.
So he is basically like when he's laying in bed with her, trying to convince her to have sex with him, and that's all fine, good, whatever. I get it. It happens. Awesome. But it's the most boring way possible. Like I sit there and listen to him for like 20 minutes saying, if you love me, you'll have sex with me. I'm like, that's not, I know this is what happens and that's fine. But it's a sledgehammer. It's like, here is the most easily shown way that you can do that. There's no nuance with it. There's nothing subtle about it. And then you get to the end and suddenly it does look subtle when, somebody, the point, I don't know what the point of that was. Like the very end of the movie, I don't know what the point is. Like it just, random violence happens, random sexual violence happens, abuse looks like that. Okay. I just don't know what I'm supposed to get out of it, I guess is the issue I had throughout the whole movie.
So lack of subtlety to sort of chalk it down to one major thing, lack of subtlety.
Yeah, and I don't mind lack of subtlety. I mean, you guys see what I review all the time. I mean, half the stuff I watch doesn't have subtlety to it. But it's the wrong tone for, what it's trying to convey. Like, I feel like this movie thinks it's important in discussing important things, but no one's going to get there and sit there and say, oh man, this is the abuse I don't understand. Like this, it's so overt that it's not really going to teach anybody or open a perspective for anybody.
Just for some perspective on Zach, for those of y'all who don't know, his top 100, and it's a rolling 100. So it started, January of this year? Is that right?
That's correct.
The number 3 is Brawl in Cell Block 99. So just to put that in perspective as to how miserable this experience was.
I can deal with someone's face being like ripped off through concrete, but not this.
What did you think of it then, Chris? Let's see if you have a different perspective on this one.
So I really think this is a film that benefits from a second viewing, and that's unfortunate because a lot of people don't ever want to watch it a second time. And I totally get why not. Like I would never say like this is something you should watch again. But I think it benefits from a second viewing because Zach, my first time I saw it was just by total coincidence, almost exactly a year ago. At the time, I was just going through the They Shoot Pictures 1000, and it was like number 1000. So it was the first film I watched in like January of last year, or something like that. And I hated it so much. I felt like it was like a well-made, artistic, interesting film for like the whole movie, and then the last scene, ever since they were at the gas station, I didn't get it. I don't think it fit the tone. I didn't think it fit the like what she was trying to say. Like it felt like a different movie that she tried to piece together. Like there was a separate horror movie that she made, and she just like took a few minutes of it and kind of bolted it on and tried to make it work somehow. And so that was my take on Fat Girl for the whole year. I didn't like it at all. But I was thinking about it. It didn't leave my head. Like I didn't stop thinking about it. And something happens when you know what's coming, where the ending feels more, to me, sorry, I don't know, but to me, the ending all of a sudden felt more like to fit the character of the young girl. Because if you think about her character throughout the way that the movie is played, she deals in extremes, right? She has very kind of extreme personal ideology that doesn't really make sense for what is she supposed to be, like 10 or 11, 12, somewhere in there?
I think 12 or 13 or something like that, yeah.
Yeah.
basically.
So she's young, right? Like she's immature. She doesn't have a good sense of balance. She has a very clear definition of what's right and wrong already, which is interesting. Um, and she's smiling while she's essentially getting raped, right? And if not smiling, then she's at least like satisfied by this happening because it fits into her worldview of like how she wanted to lose her virginity, right? Which and so it's very unnerving, and like I think knowing that that's going to happen at the end, it sort of colored the way that her character was, the way that she spoke and the way that she interacted with the other characters in the movie throughout the rest of the film, for me. And it was less random and chaotic for me watching it a second time. The other thing that helped was actually hearing other people talk about it, because there was somebody that brought up on the Reddit discussion around how this was a fantastic description, kind of what you talked about, Zach, of like the different levels of abuse and like the different levels of male sort of power over women, and the way that some of it's more subtle, and some of it's not. And so I don't really have a strong opinion on that other than to say that that's an interesting, perspective. And I can understand how that viewpoint is certainly not represented a lot in film, right? And we were talking a little bit about the Bechdel test earlier. Like it's rare to see women acting this way in movies. So in that way, it's kind of interesting and unique, and maybe has a place as a more artistic work. I'm not going to challenge you saying it's boring or on the nose or heavy-handed. Like that. I don't. Yeah, I get it. All I can say is that the second viewing helped me understand, I think, a little bit more about what I think. I hope I don't get this wrong. I think her name is pronounced Brilat. Like I think it's actually one of those times in French where you say the T. But anyways, I could be off. But what she was trying to do in a lot of her movies was to like kind of poke the audience in the same way that like a Von Trier would do, or a Von Trier would do, or like a Gaspar Noé, or like a Haneke. And she's trying to. Well, she is. She's saying like women can be this way as filmmakers as well. We can be shocking, and we can sort of be on the same level and make shocking cinema. So I think in that sense, I respect it. I will definitely not watch it a third time, but
I think you mentioning Von Trier is like super interesting, because one of the first films I wanted to like compare it to when I watched it was my distaste for his film Nymphomaniac. And I have very similar criticisms of Nymphomaniac, where it has this ending that comes out of left field. And it's like, okay, Von Trier, I got you. I understand what you're saying. Thank you for beating me in the face with it again for 4 hours. At least this one's only 86 minutes.
Yeah, totally. What about you, Adam? I saw you shaking your head a little bit on both when we were both talking.
No, I know. I think you both bring up great points. The ending is not subtle in any way. It's as wild an ending. Like I'll never forget the ending. It's as wild an ending you could possibly hope for, or maybe hope's the wrong word, but it's as wild an ending you're probably ever to see in a film. I do agree with a lot of what you're saying, Chris. I was getting those sort of feelings. Obviously, this is my first time watching it. But yeah, the main character, Anise, I think is how they pronounce her name, Anise. Yeah, she basically talks about the whole film with her and her sister Elena, how Elena is desperate for her first time to be with someone who loves her, and Anise, completely opposite. She just wants it over and done with some stranger. So I do think what happens in the film is consistent with both girls' viewpoints. Obviously, they both happen in a very twisted way. Obviously, Elena says she wants to be with someone who loves her, and Fernando, being the typical fuckboy, basically spoon feeds her all the information that her naive mind, thinks he loves. Like she's made to believe that he loves her, when obviously he knows what he's doing. He's manipulating her essentially. She's too naive to really realize that, and Anise obviously says she just wants her first time to be with some stranger, a one-time thing, and Catherine Breillat basically gives us the most extreme possible version of that, rather than a one-night stand in a bar. We see her literally raped. So it's playing to the extremes of what each character was wanting as their first time, but at the same time, it is still consistent with their views. And I think, despite we can say it's heavy-handed, we can say it's unsubtle. I think despite that, I'm happy that she was at least consistent. Now, tonally, the film does have some weird tonal moments. Like the music, I don't know if anyone else caught this. The music in this film is so weird. It's just so bizarre. There's like this weird sort of acoustic guitar, and it's all in a minor or a major key, and it's kind of like something you'd see on like a soap opera or something. It's just weird, out of place music throughout this film, and I don't know if maybe she does that on purpose to sort of make us feel maybe put us in a false sense of security, or kind of the opposite, maybe make us kind of think, why the hell is this weird music in here, and kind of put us off a bit. But like I think the film is really well directed. I'd never seen a Catherine Breillat film before. I've heard she's controversial. You're comparing her to Gaspar Noé. I was actually going to say the same thing. The vibe of this film be the same vibe of a Gaspar Noé film, where he just doesn't really give a fuck. He will sort of try out everything and anything and put it on film in an uncompromising and unflinching way, which is obviously what's done in this film as well. There's no compromises. There's not a lot of cutaways when things get heavy. So yeah, like I said in my review, it was probably the best film I'll never watch again. Maybe I was a bit too high in praise. It's probably not the well. Again, I suppose at the same time, any of the films that I'd consider really great, I'd have no problem watching it again. And that's nothing to say about the filmmaking aspect of this. Like I think the film is relatively well made. I don't have any problem with the direction. I think the direction is really good. It's shot really intimately, especially the scenes between Elena and Anise, and then once Anise becomes more alienated, the shots reflect that. They show her sort of isolated in shots in sort of wide open areas, like on like the beach scene, for example. I think it's really well directed from a filmmaking point of view. The only reason I wouldn't watch it again is obviously it's a very heavy film to watch. And it's not something that generally, to be honest with you, I would never have watched this film myself personally, if not for the fact that it shows up for the film club. But I think it's a good film. Does it have its flaws? Absolutely, it does. But I still think it's a good film, and it does have its merits. And I'm glad that I watched it. I'm glad that it's not like the kind of film where I think I've wasted an hour and a half of my life. I'm glad that I watched this film, because I do think it is a good film, but it's a hard film to watch. And yeah, some of the unsubtlety and the heavy-handedness of how it sort of shows the themes can rub some people the wrong way. So I do understand where you're coming from, and from your point of view, Zach. I think it's very much like any sort of art. It is going to be very, very subjective on whether or not you enjoy it.
And I guess I should at least put out there with my background that I work with kids for a living, and it's specifically teenagers and stuff. So I guess I'm going to react a little bit more harshly to things that I find really unsubtle when it feel like it wants to say something important, because I'm like, kids are smarter than people give them credit for, and I guess in this way it just made it feel like this is just it's kind of condescending, and that could just be my own personal thing and why I took it like that when I watched it.
That's just an interesting angle on that. What did you think of Harmony Korine's kids? Did you ever see that? That was maybe like 20, 25 years ago you made that, or I don't know, maybe 30 now.
Is that the I might be getting it mixed up with Happiness. Is this the one about the school shooting, or is it the one with Philip Seymour Hoffman? I'm trying to remember.
They're actually different films. So the one with the school shooting, I believe, is Elephant with Gus Van Sant.
Yeah, that's the one.
Philip Seymour Hoffman is Happiness. Harmony Korine's kids is when, if I've never seen it, but if I remember correctly, it's like a bunch of kids spreading AIDS, basically.
I have not seen that. I've wanted to watch it, but I have not watched. I was thinking for Happiness at first, but I haven't seen kids.
Yeah, Todd Solondz is another one that's a very shocking kind of author. The guy that did Happiness, he likes to throw in very shocking stuff. But I think Korine is up there as well. Like I think there's some directors that they use the teenage or like adolescent years as ways of showing like a greater point, because there's so much. It's a very poetic time, right? There's so much change and there's so much transformation, and I think it's an interesting time. And I think I hadn't really thought about it from the perspective of viewing them as real teenagers before. I love that you said that, because you're right. In that case, I don't think this is how teenagers would necessarily act. Like they'd probably be a little more savvy than this, but as like a metaphor, like an allegory, or like that, I think maybe the characterizations kind of worked for me. This made me think of another question though, because y'all gonna think I'm strange, but I just watched Salo for a second time as well. Um, Based on some reading I had done that made me think like, okay, at some point in my life, I'm gonna have to revisit this because I'm curious. And it's still incredibly hard to watch, but what Pasolini was trying to say about fascism and about like power structure, I think comes through a lot more in a second viewing, because I think the brain just kind of knows like what it's getting into. And so I was curious if y'all have ever had an experience like that where you see something again and it kind of takes on a much different light uh, once you kind of understand what to expect. Because it happened to me both for Fat Girl and then Solo back to back here in the last few weeks. And I just thought that was, I don't know, I wasn't expecting it in either one.
So I'm about to throw out everything I've just said and complained about with subtlety. And as hard as it is to say, because I have a ton of criticisms for it, but I do appreciate, I know you just watched it for the first time recently, Chris, but it's Cannibal Holocaust. It's horribly unsubtle. They even point out what the main theme of the movie is at the very end, just to sort of try to tie it together. But I don't know. I think it comes for me. It's more not necessarily thematically, but just because I love the found footage genre. That's kind of what got me into a lot of horror movies. That there's something about it I appreciate more I watch it, even if I have to ignore the things that it does that I completely disagree with.
I suppose just with art in general, not just even with film, the more you see something, I feel you're probably going to go either way on it. Like, there's plenty of examples I can give for films where I've seen maybe I liked it the first time, then I watched it the second time and didn't like it as much, and then vice versa, where maybe I liked something more the second time. I can't really think of an example off the top of my head for something like this, where maybe something took on a new meaning. The more times you watched it, I suppose, like one example I always give for something that I liked a hell of a lot more the second time would be Fellini's 8.5. So like I first saw 8.5 when I was 17. I just don't think I was ready for it, and I didn't like it at all. And then I watched it again maybe about 2 or 3 years ago, and I loved it. So I think, like all art, I think the more you sort of see something, you'll either grow a greater appreciation for it. You'll notice things you didn't notice before. You'll maybe view it in a different life depending on, where you are, what circumstances you're at. Or you'll think, Jesus Christ, this was terrible. Why did I like this? Which is basically my reaction to any Tarantino film.
Ooh, hot take.
Oh, hot take. Which I won't go into. But no, I'm maybe being a bit too harsh there on Tarantino. But yeah, from that point of view, maybe Fat Girl, if I watched it a year from now, like you did with a year between, maybe if I watched it a year from now, maybe I'll think completely different of it. Maybe I will think it was kind of too unsubtle and heavy-handed, and I'll be more in Zach's camp, or maybe I'll like it a lot more. And now that I know what's coming, kind of be able to read between the lines, kind of where you are standing from, Chris. So it's an interesting point to make up just about art in general. Really, the more you sort of look at something, will you grow more appreciation for it, or will you kind of see the faults more?
I actually think I'm gonna take what Chris did. I'm gonna wait about a year or so, and I'm gonna throw it on again, and just, since I know you said you were a lot more negative on it the first time, and just see how I react to it. Because I mean, you guys know, if you're not in the mood for something like that, it's just like, well, that was horrible, and I never want to see it again.
Yeah, totally.
It's like what one of the guys was saying in the Discord earlier about Antonioni's blow up. Mm-hmm. That you got to watch it in the right mood, if you don't, you'll hate it. So, Fat Girl, I could definitely see Fat Girl being one of those films. If you're not in the right mood, I can definitely understand that. I suppose it's hard to be in the right mood for a film like Fat Girl. But yeah, I think maybe revisit it. Like for me with this, like when my Letterboxd rating for this changed 3 times over the course of a few days. So I write my reviews on Letterboxd pretty much the second I finish the film.
Mm-hmm, I do too.
I don't really give it time to digest much in terms of like my core thoughts, because I like just get them out there, because otherwise I'll forget, because I'm just that kind of person. So, like when I first put up my review, I rated it 3 stars because I thought it was just okay. And then I just kept thinking about the film. It got stuck in my head, and the more I thought about it, the more I liked it, and it's eventually crept its way up to a 4-star review now. because just the more I thought about the film, and the more I liked it. Since we started the film club, there's only really been 2 films that we've watched that have just stayed stuck in my head. First one's Chungking Express, which for good reason is just, even though I've literally only seen it once, that first week, 30 weeks ago, when we started the film club, it's just been stuck in my head the whole time. And Fat Girl's been stuck in my head for the last month at this stage since we watched that. So yeah, I think it's the kind of film, like, I probably won't watch it again. I'll be straight up and honest with you. If I am, it'll be a good few years before I bring myself to watch it again. But for me anyway, it was kind of filmed over a few days. More I thought about it, the more palatable, and the more I liked it, really.
And then the second movie that you will never forget is Images.
For the wrong reasons. Because my hatred burns long and deep. I own that film on Blu-ray. I blind bought that film. Like, I didn't watch, like, when we watched it for the film club, I didn't watch it. I was not watching that film a second time. I watched that film a long time ago. I watched that film maybe back in like June or something, before the film club even existed. I blind bought that film because I love 3 women, and I thought, this film sounds great.
Any particular 3 women, or are you talking about the movie from Altman?
No, these are all
I did the same thing for Cannibal Holocaust. I have it on my shelf now because Grindhouse Releasing did like this really nice packaging of it.
That's great. I love that packaging.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, it's wonderful in terms of for fans of the film. But I'm not. Now I've got it sitting up on the shelf.
I'm curious. Did you watch the cruelty-free version or the full version?
I watched the full version, which maybe I shouldn't have done, but I just wanted to actually experience it.
Which I'm gonna make this tangent as small as possible. When I do watch the movie, though, it always makes me wonder why Cannibal Holocaust, it feels so much worse than something like Apocalypse Now, which kills a water buffalo with a machete on film, and it's never brought up. Like, no one sits there and says that movie should be condemned like Cannibal Holocaust. And I'm not saying it's right or wrong. It's just, I always think it's interesting when I watch Apocalypse Now, and I'm like, no one really talks about this water buffalo getting macheted to death.
What about the snake in Friday the 13th?
Yeah.
That's the one I always remember. Like, they literally just chopped a snake's head off on Friday the 13th.
And then you look at, like, The Godfather, they didn't kill the horse, but the horse was scheduled to die. And they said, can we just use the head, please? Coppola just had no problem with it. He was like, yeah, that's fine.
Honestly, it's a good point. And like, okay, again, I know we're on a tangent, but so Deodato actually had remorse for that later in his career. He talked about how he wished he didn't do that. Then on the other hand, you have Lenzi, who did Cannibal Ferox, who expressed no remorse for doing it, and actually, like, is famous for pushing the actors to do more violence to the animals. So, anyways, you have it's a little bit more of a nuanced discussion for sure when you start talking about other films that have it. But I think it's just so front and center and like the point of it that people have a problem with.
Yeah.
The one quick aside before we sort of wrap up this this tangent, at least. When you asked Chris back in like the Discord chat, or told him to watch the cruelty-free version, that just made me laugh my head off. Because I thought maybe you were joking, because like when I think of like cruelty-free, I think of like my girlfriend's makeup that she buys that's like cruelty-free, and it just, I don't know why I thought it was so funny, but just seeing you should watch the cruelty-free version, it just, I don't know, it just made me roar my head off.
I mean, that was like their huge advertisement when Grindhouse put that out, was like, you can watch it without all the animal death.
Yeah, true.
But that would actually, I probably wouldn't mind watching the cruelty-free version.
Yeah.
Cool. Any more points on Fat Girl? I'm just going through just to try and one thing I want to bring up kind of quickly, because we talked about it a bit in the Discord chat, and it's kind of a tangent, so I do apologize. It's about like the translations of foreign films into English, and like this I'm looking on the Wikipedia, and it actually has a few different alternative titles. So like the original French, and I'm sorry for French listeners, friends of the podcast, je suis désolé about this pronunciation. Amar Soir is like the original French title, which I'm led to believe does not mean Fat Girl. And then, according to Wikipedia, there's like 3 alternative titles, which is obviously Fat Girl. For My Sister, which apparently is very close to the literal translation of the title. And then, funnily enough, which I find hilarious, Story of a Whale.
Oh, come on. Come on.
I'm not making it up. Go to Wikipedia. Literally, Story of a Whale is apparently one of the
Come on.
alternative titles of this film.
What country was that? Uncool.
Oh gosh, I don't know. Well, it's banned in Ireland, so it's definitely not here anyway. I don't know, maybe Australia or something. But I just thought that was very funny, and it got a conversation going on the Discord about other films that had sort of weird translations. Obviously, 400 Blows is brought up. I suppose a lot of French films are going to get brought up with this. So I just wanted to bring that up really quickly. I just thought Story of a Whale was funny, and I thought you guys would be interested to know that that's apparently one of the film's alternative titles.
I prefer that title, honestly.
Yeah, it just reminds me of Squid and the Whale, the Noah Baumbach film. That's what it reminds me of.
In Japan, it was just called Virgin, which is kind of an interesting take on it. I'm just on IMDb has like the also known as page.
Oh, cool! I was looking on Wikipedia.
And there, yeah, apparently it's all kind of related to that, either Fat Girl or My Sister's a Virgin or something like that.
It sounds like a Nickelodeon 90s TV show, My Sister's a Virgin. Anise explains it all.
Yeah, exactly. No, I don't really have too much else to say. I think, it's funny where the imagination starts to connects the dots, or how imagination connects dots. I think, this film certainly brings up a lot of rich discussion around like illicit material. So I feel like these tangents were all actually on theme. It's something about this movie that it's a very like kind of uncomfortable and awkward movie to watch, which I know was by design, but certainly brings up a lot of this other stuff we've been talking about.
Yeah. You know what bothered me the most in the movie though? When I can't remember their name. The fat girl, we'll just get the titular character, when she goes over to the diving board to put on suntan lotion and then puts on like 4 gallons on her leg. It bothered me so much. I'm like, one, you're blocking the diving board, and then you're being so wasteful.
That's the big critique of this film is like the waste, the economic waste.
That is the one fun thing about when you hate a movie. You find the stupidest nitpicks about it, and you're like, that is terrible, and I hate it.
Like me and the Jigsaw in Images. God, I hate the Jigsaw so much. I'm just wondering what the budget was of Fat Girl and how much of that was spent on suntan lotion.
That'd be if I ever met the director, that'd be the first question I'd ask. Like, how much did that cost? What was the percent of the budget taken?
Especially with multiple takes, right?
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. You'd assume they did multiple takes on this. I was just, again, I'm looking, I never go on IMDb. It's been a very long, I only ever go on there if we're going to be watching a somewhat iffy film and I want to know the parental guide stuff to know what to expect, which is a reason why I ventured on for this film. And I've just noticed the plot keywords of this, which is female frontal nudity, breasts, sexuality, nudity, and loss of virginity. Those are apparently the plot keywords for this film.
Which, when they showed the older sister, when they showed her naked, the first thing I did was Google how old this girl actually was. I was like, they didn't really put a 15-year-old girl like this, did they? And she was 20, so I was like, okay, I feel a little 20? Bit better.
Okay.
Yeah, she was 20.
I just assumed the French are animals.
Well, then the girl is actually 13, so when they showed like her breast, I was like, well, I guess it didn't matter either way. They were going to do it one way or the other.
I suppose they could. I was going to say they probably can't show her engaged in sexual activity, but then she gets fucking raped at the end of the film.
It's the French.
The French. Vive la France. I can't
no
find
offense to any French listeners.
Yeah, friends of the podcast, the French, the people of France, friends of the podcast. I can't find the budget on this film. They probably want to hide it for tax evasion reasons, because they don't want to show the bank how much they spent on suntan lotion. Okay.
All right. Welcome back to Collection Corner. This is the I'm broke because I spent everything in the December edition. I did pick up a few things that I'll get to, but I wanted to bring attention. I think there's this new label coming out that I'm interested in. So I went through and I did a series, I guess, of writing on Arbelo's films this past year. There's only 8 titles, so it wasn't that hard to go through, do a complete run. And one of the guys, it turns out, that actually did a lot of the preservation work, restoration work for them name is Craig Rogers, and he's super active on Reddit actually, and is on Letterboxd as well. He's very active. And so I just thought I'd send him a note and just basically say like, "Hey, I like what you're doing," and he responded, which is super nice of him. So friend of the podcast, Craig Rogers, and I got to chatting a bit, and he's starting a new label called Deaf Crocodile, and they're going to. Yeah, it's pretty good. And here's the summary of it. So launching in 2021, Deaf Crocodile slate is focused on new, independent, or lost and unseen world cinema with a special interest in animation, LGBTQ films, cult horror, fantasy, foreign cinema, and the work of emerging and established female filmmakers. They're going to release 4 to 6 films a year, and so they start this year. So I thought I went through and signed up for his newsletter, and it's just there's something fun in the air right now. I think this is a weird kind of byproduct of COVID, but when people are home so long, didn't really have much to do, I think physical media collecting really just took off like a skyrocket. It's been such a big boon here in the last, I feel like 18 months or so. And it's giving some people some confidence to go off and start new labels, doing interesting, more kind of obscure niche work, which I love, and always want to try to promote. So Deaf Crocodile Films, and you can see some of the restoration work he did. He included it on his website. It's kind of fun. He's a very talented, I don't even know what you would call that, restoration artist or whatever. So I'll bring awareness to them. And then the label that I want to talk about just really quick is Raro Video. So I picked up a few of theirs, and I just watched one of them, which I was curious to see another Ruggero Deodato film after Cannibal Holocaust, just sort of to get a vibe for this guy. Like, who is this guy? Because that's what everybody talks about. So there's a movie he put out, which is a sort of lurid version of Polanski's Knife in the Water, and it's called Waves of Lust. So speaking of subtle titles, there subtleties. And it's interesting because it's anyways, it's a skin flick. I mean, like, kind of call it what it is. But within the movie, the characters each take on a very clear sort of metaphor for capitalism, or like the people, or maybe folks that are trying to strive up towards power. And he really like hammers it home on the stereotypes and to help prove his point. So I think it's actually a film that works as a piece of art. And it kind of works on both levels. Like, it has the women in it, if that's what you're in there for, but it also works as a piece of art. And I kind of got interested in Raro Video because what they do is every release, I've got about 20 now that I'm going to be slowly working through, and every release they have a booklet that gives a brief history, and on the back they print the back of the booklet they print the filmmaker's filmography, which not really practical in this age where it's like a click away on any search website, but it kind of harkens back to the days. I don't know if any of y'all collected CDs back in the day. But they typically, with the old CD collecting, they would put like, here's the other work from this label, or here's the other work from the artist, kind of on the back of the booklet. So it kind of harkened back to the old days, where that's how you found out about new stuff. And their transfers are poor, but the special features are great. So I'm kind of curious to check out more of this label. And they focus in just on Italian films that are like films you haven't heard of from the directors you have. That makes sense. So
cool.
Yeah. What about y'all? Zach, I guess?
Yeah. Just on your Raro Video, I would recommend their release for Hanging for Django. That's the only one I have, but I really enjoyed all the special features for it. So looking for something spaghetti Western, definitely go for that. I haven't gotten a lot the last couple weeks. I've been just kind of finishing up a couple things on my John Carpenter stuff, double dipping, because who doesn't need 6 copies of Halloween or The Thing? In case the other ones break, of course. But actually, I'm gonna concentrate on one. I actually just watched it recently, and somebody on the Discord who's one of their favorite movies is Possession, done through Mondo Vision. I don't have anything else they've ever done, but I really love the case of this. It's really well done. It's really nice. It's got a nice booklet and everything with it, and I finally got to watch the movie for the first time very recently, after owning this copy for 2.5 years. and never watching it. Just as a random recommendation, it's pretty good. Other than that, I got a steelbook from Big Trouble in Little China and Someone's Watching Me, which was a Carpenter TV movie where he kind of did a De Palma Hitchcock thing, and it was good. So not a whole lot here for me. So Adam, I'll let you take it.
You really are going deep in your Carpenter collection of your if you're collecting his TV movies now.
Yeah, I'll get Elvis soon. Don't worry.
Possession. You just reminded me of Possession because there's no Region B release, and I've been wanting to see it for a long, long time. So now that I'm region free, actually, I might try and see if they do. I don't think. I remember there was like a limited edition.
They're both done by Mondo Vision. They have a standard.
They have a standard as well.
That one I have is a standard, and it's still really nice.
There's a 4K that just came out too. It might even be.
In France. Yep.
Yeah. Sorry, what was that?
France just put out a 4K.
See, I'm not 4K. I'm only Blu-ray at the moment. Yeah. I'm very tempted to go to 4K, but I just went region free, so I'm not ready to take that leap just yet. Oh, cool! $9. Yeah, I am ordering Possession soon. And next time I do, I'm going to wait until some of the Criterion releases for Region A come out, and I'm going to do like a bulk order because just saves me paying a ton on shipping. Just for one thing. So I'll put Possession in my basket, ready to, because I've been wanting to see that for a while. Kind of similar. I've just been picking up some random pieces here and there, nothing too special. I got a couple of Eureka films in, Ace in the Hole, from Billy Wilder, if I remember correctly. I haven't watched it yet. Pick Up on South Street from Sam Fuller. I'm a big Sam Fuller guy. And Pick Up on South Street was really good. But the one I'm going to talk about is another Eureka release. And I'm now going to call Eureka friends of the podcast because they sent me this release about a week early when I pre-ordered it. So Eureka, Massive Cinema, you are friends of the podcast. I do actually have a review. Sorry to plug the website again, but I do have a review of this film up on the website. It's called The Last Warning. It was an early film, 1928 in the USA, directed by a guy called Paul Lenny, who was a German who was working in the Expressionist movement and then came over to the United States to work around the same time that Lubitsch would have. A lot of these sort of German guys would have started emigrating over to the States to make movies in Hollywood. Mm-hmm. It's a really, really interesting film. It was made in two versions, both a silent version and a sound version. The sound version is considered lost, and apparently that's a good thing because the contemporary reviews for it were not very good because of the limitations at the time. They found the dialogue was just very clunky and just kind of killed a lot of what was going on. So obviously I watched the silent version and I thought it was absolutely great. The intertitles were so creative, so many different fonts, so many different things. Like there's one intertitle where these two characters come in and they're basically both saying the same thing. So they have one intertitle card with the two same pieces of dialogue, one under the other, and then they then merge into one big piece of dialogue to sort of say they're saying at the same time. And it's full of really, really creative title cards. It's really great in that respect. The story is kind of just your sort of standard horror mystery kind of story. Basically, it's this play that was going on in a theater, and during the production one of the cast members was killed and his body then disappears, and obviously the whole play gets shut down as a big investigation, but nobody can figure out the mystery, and all the characters are brought back together about 5 years later to perform the play again, but somebody's trying to sabotage what's going on, and obviously the police are there to try and figure out what's going on. So the plot is pretty sort of standard, but it's just told so creatively. Obviously the title cards, as I said before, but the visuals are just really incredible. The camera movements are like something you wouldn't really see in this kind of film, or this era of film, I should say. The camera in this era is normally very static, but in this, it just moves around so much. They must have had it on some kind of contraption because it was almost like they were doing dolly shots before. Obviously dollies were a thing. It was like the camera was swooping, it was going up and down different levels, it was shooting at these really crazy oblique angles. Just really, really creative filmmaking, really ahead of its time in terms of its camera work. I thought it was a really great film. The packaging from Eureka is really nice. It's a really great transfer. There's like a few maybe sort of hisses and pops on the visual on the film. You know, it does have that grain, but it's not like it's like 2D. It is like definitely like a 1080p presentation. It's from a 4K scan apparently, so it is really good quality. Some really good booklet, like all Eureka stuff. It's a really good booklet. And the kind of odd thing for this film, which I found a bit bizarre when I looked it up afterwards, it has a new score. So it's not like the original score that first came with the film. It was like a brand new score made from scratch. And it was made by this guy called Arthur Barrow. And whenever I see like, people who do new scores for these silent films, I always like to look up the composer to see if they've done anything else or what they normally do. And this guy, Arthur Barrow, he's not like just a normal film composer. He was Frank Zappa's bass guitarist in the 70s and the 80s.
Oh, wow.
So like he wasn't like just this normal stuffy, and you would never know. Like the score is just like a sort of I say standard classical score. There's so much different genres brought into it, and it's a really, really creative score. But yeah, I was just so shocked. I thought I was on the wrong Wikipedia page when I looked up the guy. I'm like, there's no way Frank Zappa's bassist is the guy who did this. And then I went to look at his credits, and lo and behold, he's credited for not just this, but tons of other silent film compositions. So obviously a really talented guy. And I just thought that was really fun and interesting. So yeah, The Last Warning, Paul Ennie, the release from Eureka, really, really great. If you're region free or if you're like me in region B, definitely recommend picking it up. It's really, really good.
That reminds me of something. I don't know what you said, and maybe think about this. Maybe just people nowadays restoring old classic films or something. I don't know, something that triggered that I forgot to bring up that I'm super excited about. So Severin Films, which is I don't know how much y'all know about them, but they do a lot of horror and genre filmmaking releases. They have something coming out in May that I'm so pumped about. It's a 9-disc set called The Eurocrypt of Christopher Lee.
Mm-hmm. I saw it.
It?
Yeah, it looks so good.
Oh my God, it looks amazing. So 5 movies. And then the thing that I'm maybe even more excited about is they actually went back and restored 27 episodes or 24 old episodes of Christopher Lee hosting a horror show, kind of in the way that Hitchcock did. I don't know, I haven't seen it, but just what a fun, interesting find for them. And I can't wait. May can't get here fast enough.
I love when companies do that, when they just release just something weird and random and just out of the blue. Obviously, I know there's a lot more companies for that, in the US, like the likes of Severin and stuff. Like Eureka do it. So like obviously, Eureka don't just have a Masters of Cinema collection. They have like another sort of non-Masters of Cinema releases, and they're actually just announced recently a limited edition set of Boris Karloff at Columbia, where it's like a bunch of like old Boris Karloff films that I've never heard of it in my life. Like one of them is called The Boogeyman Will Get You. Like these are the kind of films that they've collected, that they've done high definition scans of and are putting out in this set. So I do love when companies just go out on a limb and just release something absolutely bonkers like that. It's great.
Yeah, totally.
All right, and now we're going to have a little discussion on The Night of the Hunter. It's about a religious fanatic marries a gullible widow whose children are reluctant to tell him where their real father hid their $10,000 he had stole during a robbery. So apparently you had the most controversial take based on Reddit, Adam, so I guess I'll let you go first.
I don't know what the hell was going on with that one. I just kept getting downvoted, and all I did was say how great the film is. Yeah, I don't know, maybe this is controversial, but I think it's the best film ever made. I literally cannot name a single flaw in the film. I think it has a lot more perfections than it could have to being anything considered a flaw. Everything about it, like in terms of you look at the main components of what makes a film great, in terms of characterization, plot, direction, cinematography, production design, this film has it all. And it's such a different film from what you would see, not just in this era, but just in general. It just has this atmosphere, and I'm so glad that I wasn't the only one to bring it up, because the sort of fairy tale atmosphere, when I was seeing other people saying that in their reviews, I felt so vindicated, because at least I knew I wasn't sort of reading into something that maybe wasn't there. Yeah, this film for me is perfect. I wouldn't change a single thing about it. Yeah, I'm just gonna sing this film's praises the whole time. So maybe if someone has a more controversial take, they might want to take over, because I only have good things to say about this movie.
Honestly, if somebody hates this movie, they're probably going to hate this segment of the podcast, because I think we all have pretty positive opinions about it.
If someone hates this movie, they shouldn't be listening to this podcast, because it means they don't like film. So there you go.
There's a German female director named Lotte Reininger that was somebody who was like really pushing the limits of what you could do with animation. She made what's considered, depending on who you talk to, the first or the third full-length animated film back in 1926 called The Adventures of Prince Ahmed. And she, for her visual style, she took from like a Southeast Asian puppet, kind of like puppet shadowing style of animation. And it allowed her just to have a lot of creativity, and for a film in 1926 to have things like flying carpets and dragons and monsters that kind of transform, and just this amazing, like really like kind of explosion of the imagination. But it was very daring to do, right? Because there wasn't a lot of precedent for this, and she had the big potential of financial failure and ruin after trying this, and it worked for her. And I am really sad to hear that it didn't work for Charles Laughton, because I feel like there's a lot of similarities in what I saw him try to do with this. Like, if you look at the other films that came out in 1955, it's a very boring year for cinema. If you look at, oh shoot, I just closed the tab down. Hold on. That's not as compelling if I can't mention any of them. But if you look at the movies that came out that year, it's like East of Eden, which is fine. To Catch a Thief, which is kind of a middle one for Hitchcock. Guys and Dolls, which again is fine. Rebel Without a Cause. I mean, these are all considered classics, but there's none of them that are just like grip you and like pull you to that year and say like you've got to look deeper into 1955. And in that group of mediocre, like to high end classics, I guess, but nothing really like compelling, this story comes out that's completely unique, completely out of left field, visually, artistically. And it was hated, unfortunately. And it's such a tragedy, because maybe it was a marketing department fail, or maybe people weren't ready for it. Maybe he was just ahead of his time. But like, I don't know if I'm ready to call it the greatest movie ever made, but it's probably going to be the most memorable in terms of the experience of watching it for me. Like I think that just in the same way that Michel Gondry always kind of captures my imagination with what he does with perspective and angles, I feel like this film, I was like, I couldn't take my eyes off the screen, because you'd have a regular 1950 kind of black and white shot of like a family talking, and then all of a sudden it would pull back or cut, and it almost as if you were in an animated film, because of the way they use backdrops and lighting and dark shadows to make it to where almost all the characteristics were stripped off their face. Like, every choice that was made was brilliant. I think it was just, it killed me that this was not received better in its time, and that he didn't have a long film career. We're talking about him as one of the greatest filmmakers.
And Chris, you were talking about, maybe the reasons behind that were, him being ahead of his time, or, and I think that's a big part of it too. I mentioned a little bit of that in my write-up, but one thing I think is I'm not going to say it's mean-spirited by today's standards, but when I think of 1955, I could definitely see this as being, it's a story essentially about making two kids orphans. And I think that is going to be something that's really rejected during that time. You hear Eisenhower era and stuff like that. And I think that pushed a lot of people the wrong way.
Yeah, I'd agree with that in terms of like figuring out why it wasn't loved at the time when it came out. Yeah, it's definitely not your standard 1955 film. I did something similar, Chris. I was looking at films that were made in that year, and I suppose I wasn't really looking more at whether the films are good or not. I was more so looking at from a content point of view. And that era, you get a lot of decadent films, like To Catch a Thief is decadent, sort of Monte Cristo kind of setting. The 7 Year Itch was the same year, so you have like Marilyn Monroe and stuff. So you'd have a lot of films around that time that were, films that where people wanted escapism, and they wanted to They wanted to be these sort of cool, beautiful, sophisticated characters. And then you have this film that came out towards the back end of the noir era. People were kind of done with noir around this time. They didn't really want anything dark and deep and melodramatic. And this film pulls out all the stops to be as dark as possible. Obviously, the shot of Willa in the water is obviously iconic, and it's so dark. Especially for that era, you wouldn't really expect to see a shot like that. So
I'd love to know how they pulled it off. Actually, I actually don't know how they did that, but it looks great.
I would assume it's some kind of water tank, and then they were sort of filming through the glass with like a dummy or something. But it's a breathtaking shot. So yeah, as to why the film wasn't loved at the time, I can only assume it's basically that people just weren't wanting something like this. It's post-war era. People wanted something lighter. People didn't want to be reminded of the dark days. They just wanted some escapism. So I can only assume that was why. And it's obviously a pity Charles Laughton didn't direct more. Obviously, he starred in so many films. He's probably one of the most celebrated actors of the early 20th century in cinema. So we're very lucky to still have that. So around Charles Laughton, I kind of find it funny when people talk about the fact that this was Laughton's only film. And it's almost like people forget how good of an actor and how influential Laughton was just in cinema in general, like not away from this film, like not obviously the films he starred in, and also the people he discovered. Like he discovered Maureen O'Hara and brought her to Hollywood. So he was a very influential figure. People kind of talk about him. Some people at least kind of talk about him like a Herc Henry kind of person who made Carnival of Souls and then never did a single thing again. When he was so much more than that. He worked with some of the greatest directors of all time. So he obviously he got a lot of influence from the right places, is what I'm trying to say. And obviously having someone like Stanley Cortez, who, if I'm honest with you, I didn't know a ton about Stanley Cortez until very recently. I just kind of assumed he was just a normal cinematographer, and maybe just did a bit of work. But he worked with so many great directors as well. He worked with Fritz Lang. He worked with Orson Welles. He worked with Samuel Fuller. So, Laughton, obviously, he knew a lot about film. This is more towards the end of his acting career. So he had so much experience of film and working with great directors and great filmmakers and great visionaries. And obviously having Stanley Cortez at his side, I can totally understand how he was able to pull this off. This is not like a miracle film where it's like, oh, this is like the best debut film ever made, so sad he didn't make any more. I can definitely understand how he was able to pull off something so great with his intelligence and, with his experience in the industry for, the 3 decades prior to this film being made.
Yeah, no, that's a good point.
I was just going to note that one thing I just kind of thought was a fun fact is this was actually based off of a true story that happened by a serial killer in West Virginia in the 1930s. Yeah, it was. So in a sense, this is also kind of like a true crime sort of thing. Of course, that one ends a lot more tragically than this one does, if that's possible. But yeah, and then of course it went on to be made into a book, and I'm guessing none of us here have read it, if I'm going to take a random guess.
I didn't know it was a book.
I didn't know until I started looking into it when I first watched it. But yeah, apparently it's based off of a book that's based off of a serial killer from West Virginia, where this guy pretty much pulled a similar scam. Of course, they're kind of making it a little bit simpler here. What he did, his name was Harry Powers, I believe. So they didn't even change the name a whole lot.
Yeah.
But he would take out those love ads, the Craigslist personals back in the 30s equivalents in newspapers, and find widows, find out where their money was, murder the wife and the kids, and start it all over again. So like a really dark individual. And surprisingly, as many serial killers we have in the U.S., he's not one that's brought up a lot, and he probably is one of the darker ones, especially in that era.
Probably because you have so many, to be fair.
Yeah, we have quite a few.
Overabundance of serial killers. It's hard to choose. It's kind of like choosing your favorite movie. There's too many to choose.
There's too many.
You got to make like a top 20. and then or maybe like a top 100 and then a top 20. You do that with serial killers in America as well.
And then what you can do is you can have like three guys on a podcast dissect why anybody would put those serial killers in their top 20. Bundy wasn't that impressive.
You have Ed Gein at number 19. What the hell?
That's funny. Actually, Zach, that reminds me of your review. I don't know how much you want to talk about it, but I think that's a good tie-in to kind of your take on the film, because I hadn't thought about it from. Yeah, there's something you said which I'm going to spoil it for people, and sorry if you don't want to get too much into it, but a buffer between the monster horror movies that were coming out kind of in the 20s, 30s, maybe early, even 40s a little bit, and then the horror of man, or like the horror of like the slashers and like a lot of that later on. I don't know if you want to elaborate on that, but that really struck me as something that it was a great take, and I'd never thought about.
Yeah, of course. I have a deep love for slasher movies, and they of course dominated the '80s, especially, and to the point where they're so oversaturated now, nobody wants to touch them as much. Yeah. But there is this dead area. I'm not going to say dead, but there is this loss of identity that you have kind of in between the Universal monster era and the slasher era. Where horror didn't really know what it wanted to be. Of course, you had a lot of the sci-fi stuff coming out, like the original The Fly and stuff like that, but it didn't have that strong presence that those two major eras did. And what I liked about Night of the Hunter is it took both of those elements. It took out the buffer of the supernatural monster, and instead just allowed the human to be there in its place, while still making it feel like a story. We talked about the fairy tale aspect. Adam mentioned that, and it's almost like breaking that apart. And I think that's what kind of gives it this hard hitting punch, is that realization that there's a reality to this, and that it's not just a story. It's something that can happen to anyone. And of course, that is the basis of Black Christmas and Halloween, and of course even before that, Psycho and Powell's Peeping Tom, and I think it's an insanely important in that historically for both the monster era and the slasher era that would come out later.
Yeah, that's such a great point. Like, even after you said it, I was sort of just thinking back on the film, and thinking about the mannerisms of Powell, and obviously voice notwithstanding and intelligence notwithstanding, but in terms of physical presence, it just reminds me so much of Karloff as Frankenstein. Just his hulking movements, and he's obviously Powell, or Robert Mitchum, I should say, is he's a big buff dude. He's not a small skinny guy, and it's just his physicality, especially when he was chasing the kids from the basement, or when he's sort of stalking around. He has that Karloff-esque physicality, which again kind of even reminds me a bit then of Michael Myers, where
absolutely
just has that sort of square-shouldered, tall, looming presence, if you get me. So that was a really great point to read, and you put up your review. I thought that was something I just didn't think about at all, but it made so much sense after you said it.
I'm just glad no one was annoyed that I was forcing more genre films to be discussed when we talk about art house films.
Hey.
Just wait until Criterion puts out Title 2000, and they're like, okay, now what are we gonna do? It's gonna be the era of genre filmmaking. Criterion's not too far behind on this. But I think that I listened to about the first 5 minutes of the commentary. I was just curious to hear kind of the introductions and maybe some of the, they always kind of do like a summary in the beginning of a commentary, and it's on the Criterion channel still, actually, if you all have a chance. It's a really interesting commentary, because they get one of the second unit directors on to talk about the experience in making the film. And the first thing he says is, this film is about the battle between good and evil, light and dark, love and hate. And I think that's what I love so much about your point, Zach, kind of tying it back into what the direction they were kind of going with in the commentary, which is that it's something that comes up in a lot of films, with horror films or thrillers or dramas, this battle between light and dark, and it might be the best one to do that, both visually and in story. I think,
Yeah,
right?
the
Because
contrast
that
in
is
it,
so
absolutely.
easy to make that topic cliche and cheesy and not good. But I think the way that they shot it visually and the way they told the story makes it like a very good representation of that struggle, which is I don't know, I latched onto.
For me, I think that good versus evil is not between the Harpers and Powell though, because John and Pearl, they're still protecting their criminal father. And I brought this up on someone's review. Someone was mentioning about the ending, which I won't spoil here, because yeah, it's not as crazy as Fat Girl's ending. So I don't want to spoil it. But someone was asking, about the film or the film's ending and why John did what he did. And for me, it all harks back to what set the plot in motion. And what set the plot in motion was this stolen money, this dirty money. And John essentially was suffering from the sins of the father by protecting the stolen money. It was kind of like, the sins of the father, that sort of biblical idea that they're passed down from father to son.
Uh-huh.
John was protecting the stolen money that his father, it's not like it was like an old family inheritance money. It was stolen and a man was murdered for this money. It's almost cursed. So for me, the actual sort of good versus evil battle is not between the Harpers and Powell, because really they're both fighting for the same sort of evil end, essentially, of keeping the stolen money. It's probably more so between Powell and Miss Cooper,
Yep.
who she is just I called her like the fairy godmother of this film, and it's more so just because of the opening sort of shot where it's like where her face is lit up in the starlight and she's telling the story of the children. It's like she has an omniscient presence in the film, especially like at the end, she even breaks the third wall, or the fourth wall, I should say. She breaks the fourth wall at the end of the film, and it's almost like she sort of realizes. That's why I kind of call her like a fairy godmother character. And I think her and Powell are just like, they're just polar opposites. They're just two forces of nature in their respective sort of sides. I'm kind of talking like Damon Lindelof here, we're talking about good and evil being forces of nature and things like that. I'm going a bit lost on it, but yeah, I think the sort of dynamic between when Miss Cooper comes into the film, I think the whole film just changes. The first hour is just so dark and you can say depressing, but dark is the best way to really put it. And even though she comes a bit crotchety and a bit strict, she intensely cares for the children that are under her care, and she will do everything to protect them, to protect them from what she calls the wolf in sheep's clothing with Harry Powell. So I definitely think there's a power struggle there. But yeah, what really sets it off is the money, the stolen money. If that didn't come into play, obviously the whole plot never happened. So it is kind of almost like a red herring or something, or a Chekhov's gun. It's something that gets the sort of plot moving. But it's like, I don't think that the Harper, even though, look, I'm not gonna call John Harper a agent too bad. He's like a 10-year-old kid at the end of the day. He's just doing something he promised his dad before his dad got taken away. But the fact that he was himself doing an evil deed by holding the money does not exactly make him a character of, going by the force of good, if that makes sense.
A slight different take on what you just said is I think it's actually a battle for the children's souls. I don't think it was like, I didn't perceive it as the children were meant to represent good. I think it was when Cooper came in, I think it was like they were both battling for their souls. Like, were these kids going to choose money and like all that goes with it, or finally see an example of love and good and sort of choose that, so to speak. And I think that's what maybe very slightly different way of saying, I think, a similar thing.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
So kind of like the battle for the idea that evil is through nurture, and even someone like Powell wasn't born evil; he became evil through his life, and the children could end up the same way. Yeah, I like that. Yeah, I definitely see that.
Let's try to think of anything else I want to bring up. I was looking through Charles Laughton's filmography. He worked with so many good directors.
One thing, there's actually a decent amount of humor in The Night of the Hunter that I remember the first time I watched it, I didn't really expect. And it's just little small things. But probably the one that I thought was the funniest was when, after he kills their mom, And he's talking to the neighbors, and they're all like, I don't know what's gotten into her and all this other stuff. And he's like, Satan. And I'm like, and she's like, oh, that's right. And I'm like, that's awesome.
Oh yeah, well it's just purely radicalized that town. Like I love that scene sort of shortly after he's married to Willa. And obviously there's the first scene where she, it's on their wedding night, she goes to consummate the marriage and he's like, oh no, this is, that's what Satan wants you to do and all this stuff. And the next thing we see her, she's like a completely wide-eyed lunatic cult wife, It's a complete change in her characterization. The part that gives me a little bit of a chuckle, I suppose, is like Powell's opening monologue when he's driving in his car. He's like, "How many wives is that now, Lord? 5? Maybe 6." It's just he just there talking to himself about all the terrible things he does. I thought that was kind of great. Yeah, Lawton worked with so many good people. You said you were gonna. Did you say you were gonna watch The Old Dark House?
I didn't. I'm gonna see it tonight, actually.
Okay, because Charles Lawton's in that. That's the only reason why I brought it up.
No, he's an incredibly accomplished actor, as well as like on Broadway, he did a ton. So he's like a very, yeah. I guess I should have clarified by director, but no, I mean the guy's like a legend for sure.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And like I didn't even realize until I started looking him up. Like again, I was one of those guys who thought when Night of the Hunter he just came out of nowhere and just made this film and like Herc, is it Herc Henry or Herc Harvey, the guy who made. Is it Herc Henry, the guy who did Carnival of Souls?
I think Harvey, but yeah.
Herc Harvey. No, it's definitely Herc something. I'm actually going to look it up now because it'll annoy me.
There's an interesting scene, a featurette on that Blu-ray that talks about he was like making
industrial films. Yeah. I watched that short, the extra. It's really, really interesting.
Yeah,
because he gets annoyed when people ask him, why did you only make one film? Like, I made thousands of films.
Yeah, right.
They just weren't features. They were just industrial education films.
Yeah, how to put up like ladder safety and stuff.
Yeah, Herc Harvey, that was him, Herc Harvey. Because I thought Charles Lawton was another one of it, because everyone talks about, Charles Lawton, or Night of the Hunter's great, the director only made one film. So I just thought he was another one of those guys until I looked him up and I saw, oh, well, this guy's obviously a very accomplished actor. Like, he worked with James Whale, Cecil B. DeMille, Alfred Hitchcock, Charles Vidor, John Renoir, Jules Dassin, King Vidor. And this guy worked with so many. David Lean, like Billy Wilder. Witness of the Prosecution. I have that on Blu-ray. He was in Spartacus. Apparently, I haven't seen Spartacus, so I can't say for sure. It's one of the Kubricks I haven't seen. He worked with so many great directors. It's kind of not a surprise that he was able to make such a great film himself. So now we come to our final segment, which as always is Any Other Business, where we just talk about a film that we saw recently that we want to shout out. It doesn't have to be Criterion. It doesn't have to be good. Just something that we like that we want to talk about. So who will we start with? TikTok. We'll go with you, Zach. What have you seen recently that you liked?
It's funny because I was just telling you guys about the Warriors thing I was going through. I'm not very familiar with Walter Hill. I've never watched a lot of his stuff, but I did watch a film of his called Southern Comfort. It has a pretty good cast, and it has Powers Booth. It has Fred Ward. It has one of the Carradines in it. I don't know which one. I think it's Keith Carradine. But essentially, it's kind of a mixture of Deliverance meets Dog Soldiers, in the sense that it's about these Army recruit guys who are in Louisiana down in the swamps, and they're supposed to go to this thing for a training retreat, this area in the swamp. And well, because of like all the rain and stuff, that area is underwater, or the way they were going to get there is underwater. So they decide that they find these like canoes sitting out, and they're going to take them, and so they don't have to double all the way back. And one of the brilliant Army guys decides to take his M16 filled with blanks and shoot it towards the Cajuns, who have no idea they're blanks, obviously, and they end up shooting their sergeant. So it's kind of, in a way, a very budget Vietnam. Like, it is the only way I could ever see a Vietnam movie being done on the world's cheapest budget. And it goes through a lot of the same thematic stuff, but it's a lot of fun. It goes through a lot of like emotional beats you wouldn't expect. But I highly recommend it. It's fun. It's a really quick movie. But it's one of the few like war movies you're going to watch that isn't really a war. That kind of keeps the fun aspect of it.
Cool. I don't know why when you said Fred Ward, I pictured the guy who played Robin in the Batman series with Adam West, and then I had to look it up, and it's like, oh, that's Burt Ward. I was like, Jesus, why is he in this kind of film?
Tremors, if you're looking for Fred Ward.
Oh yeah, okay. I don't know why. The name Ward just threw me, and I thought, why is Robin in this kind of weird action film?
That would be great, though.
What about you, Chris?
Well, Zach, how many movies have you seen this year? Because you have a goal of 500 for the year, right?
I'm a little bit behind on my thing. I just hit 50 last night.
Okay.
At this pace, I'll watch about 425, I think, when I did the pace.
Blackers. That's awesome. Yeah, I'm actually just over 50 as well, but I start a new job on Tuesdays, and that's going to drop precipitously.
So I should be able to catch up. Good.
I just looked up really quick to see if Walter Hill was related to Jack Hill. I've seen a bunch of Jack Hill movies recently. Are you familiar with that guy?
A little bit, yeah.
Like there's this one called Spider Baby, which is just phenomenal.
I know Spider Baby. That's the one.
So fun. And then another one called Pit Stop, which is a fun kind of like car race, like around like drama set around a racetrack, I guess. And then he's probably most famous for doing like Foxy Brown and Coffee and those. But I don't think Walter Hill's related to him. Anyways, I was hoping that would be a fun little Hollywood connection there, but common last name, I guess. The one I want to talk about, after seeing Solo and Cannibal Holocaust, I wanted to get those out of the way, like back to back, so I could just kind of get them out of my system. I decided it was time to finally start the Fellini's, the march through all of Fellini's works for this year. I had been slowly collecting all of his films last year with the goal of making this the year that I do that. And the last one came in kind of late January from Italy. It took like 3 months to get in, but I have it. But so anyways, so I have all of anything he did feature length, including the TV doc Clowns, which is apparently pretty wild. And then also all of his collaboration work that he did. There's a big deal in the 60s and 70s apparently in Italy to get like all of the well-known directors together and make like some collaborative works where they like anthology works, I guess, for comedies. So I got all those as well. I'm 2 in now. I've seen Variety Lights, and then I just last night saw The White Sheikh. And God, it's just, I don't know, maybe it's just more the way that my brain works or something, but it's especially after seeing those like terrifying movies, it's so refreshing. I love Fellini so much. There's something about Italian filmmakers for me that like, especially like the whole neorealism movement, like Ormi did it as well, where you just take relatively normal situations and put characters in it, and you hire a lot of non-actors, and you go out and you film, and you put just a few elements in the film that are kind of fantastic or extraordinary. And Fellini did it better than anybody. And I love, I don't know how much, have y'all seen either one of those movies before, Variety Lights or White Sheikh?
No, I went to go actually watch The White Sheikh earlier after reading your review, and Criterion Channel doesn't have it. I'm waiting to see when they're going to add all the Fellini stuff like they did with Vardo's sets and the Bergman set. They added all those onto the channel. So I'm hoping they all come onto the channel as well, because after reading your review, I got The White Sheikh sounded really great. So I went to go watch it earlier, but I didn't then because it wasn't on the channel.
It's fun. Yeah, I've seen probably, I don't know, 6 or 7 Fellini movies at this point, and this is the most straightforward, just comedy that he did, which is interesting because he has Antonioni writing with him. And then I guess, this is another kind of point that I was thinking about. I didn't know much about him, to be honest, other than I've seen 8.5 and Armor Cord and La Dolce Vita, I guess, before I started this, maybe one more. But just like Kurosawa did, and got me thinking about if other filmmakers did this, he made a lot of his movies with the same people. and in this case, it's writers. But if you look through his filmography, almost all of his films, if not all of them, the names Tullio Pinelli and Ennio Flaiano come up in most of them as collaborators and co-writers on his films. And I just, Kurosawa had his like, there was between 3 or 4 other writers on almost every one of his films as well. And it's just interesting that, I guess that you talk about filmmaking is never done on an island, and at least with these two, sort of well-respected and well-known directors that I've been working through, it certainly feels that way. Whether it's a cast of common actors or a common crew, it's like a movement almost. It's not just one person. The person becomes like the face of this movement, but he gets to take a lot of people on the journey with him, so it's kind of fun.
Awesome. I'm looking forward to watching more Fellini because I've seen very little of him. I've only seen 8.5, La Dolce Vita, I Vitelloni, which is my favorite of his, and La Strada. So I'm definitely looking forward to watching more of his stuff. I'm kind of tempted to maybe splurge for the set, but I want to get the Bergman set a bit more than I want the Fellini set. So yeah, I was saying I'm hoping once more of his stuff goes up on the channel, I'll definitely be checking it out, especially his earlier stuff.
It's fun, yeah. What about you, Adam?
For me, I watched just the other day. I'm friends of the podcast will know I'm a big Abbas Kiarostami fan. I think he's just a genius filmmaker. I went back and watched his first film, like his first sort of what you would call a full-length film. It's just over an hour long, and it's called The Traveller. It's kind of like a weird companion piece to Where is the Friend's House, because they both follow basically a young boy on a quest or a journey. And it's just about them getting from point A to point B and the people they meet along the way and the things they do to complete their quest. So it's a very straightforward, standard storytelling, but the way the two films are told and the characters are very, very different. So in Where is the Friend's House, which takes place in rural Iran, the boy is on a noble quest. He's driven by kindness to try and return a notebook to his friend who, if he doesn't do his homework that night, he'll get expelled from school. And he does everything he can in his possible power to get that notebook to his friend. Whereas in The Traveller, it's an urban set film. It takes place in a city, very narrow streets. It's shot in very high contrast, just shot in very volatile black and white film. So it has a very neo-realist feel to it, the way the film is shot. You can definitely tell, like, I'd be surprised if Kiarostami wasn't like a Rossellini fan, the way this film is shot, or a De Sica fan, actually, even more so. And yeah, the main character, the boy in this film, is just a nightmare child. He never goes to school, never does his homework, he lies, cheats, and steals. He's just completely selfish. And his journey, his quest in this film is to go to see a soccer game in Tehran, which is a 150-mile round trip for him, and obviously it's very expensive. So he essentially swindles his way to getting all the money by, selling the goalposts that belonged to his soccer team that all of his teammates pitched in with, and stealing from his mother, and even gets a broken camera and takes portraits of people. Obviously, the camera doesn't even work. He plans just telling them afterwards they moved too much, so the pictures didn't come out right. He's just a complete swindler, a complete con man of a 12-year-old, and yeah, he's just driven completely by selfish just to go see this soccer match. Yeah, the way the film was shot was really, really great. Like, Kiarostami just has a real touch of magic when it comes to telling such a simple story. He always makes it look interesting. Just the sort of quick editing in this film, and the very, I don't want to say tense shots, but the shots are very sort of close quarters, and it kind of matches the intensity of the character, because he is he's an intense young kid. He's intelligent, but he is intense as well. And when he does eventually get to Tehran to go to the soccer match, it's kind of, and this is what really sort of ties it into neorealism as well. It's very similar in terms of how it looks to the scene. I don't know if you guys have seen Bicycle Thieves, but like the scene at the end of Bicycle Thieves where they're like outside the soccer match with all the crowds, very, very similar in how that's sort of portrayed. So I thought that was another cool tie into the way this film sort of harks back to like a neo-realist era about sort of 20, 30 years before this film was made. But it was really great. Like, I've yet to see a Kiarostami film that I don't like. So I was kind of going into this with sort of just medium hopes because I knew it was his first film. I wasn't expecting a ton out of it, but I really, really enjoyed it. It's probably the best film I've seen in a good while, not counting Night of the Hunter, which obviously was a rewatch for me. But in terms of like the best new film I've seen in a while, probably will be right up there, if not the best I've seen in a while from a new film perspective.
I guess the biggest question for you, the way that you did your top 100, is it the best film from the year that it was made?
Oh, geez. I'll find out.
Isn't that how you did your top 100? Oh, no, you chose your top 100 and then ranked them.
Exactly. I just chose my top 100 and just ranked them.
That's right.
But I'm now curious to see if there was a film from 1974 that's in my top 100 that I might like more. I'm just going to actually look that up right now really quick because I have Letterboxd open. Let me scroll through here.
Chris, I hope you didn't mind that I stole your idea for the top 100.
Oh, thanks for the shout out, man. I'm honored. Yeah, no, I don't mind at all. I just like you said, I don't trust my memory, so.
Yeah, I mean, some of that stuff I had on like my top 20. I was like, I haven't seen that since I was in college. I was like, I don't even know if I'd like it anymore.
This is actually kind of weird. I only have 4 films in my top 100 that were made in the 70s.
Wow, that's the polar opposite of mine.
I'm surprised myself looking at it, to be honest with you. There's actually a 7-year gap. So I have The Bird with the Crystal Plumage, which is 1970, and then The Ascent, which is 1977. So apparently I don't like any films made between those years. Now, to be fair, with this top 100, it's definitely not complete. It's mostly pulled from my Letterboxd rankings over the last year, with some ones in between that I remember that I thought, okay, well, I can't leave this film out. So I'm sure there is 70s film enthusiasts, don't come knocking at my door. I'm sure there is films in the 70s that I do like, but off the top of my head, yeah, Traveller, 1970, best film in 1974. You heard it here first.
It's going to be hard competition with The Night Porter, but
is that year?
And Texas Chainsaw Massacre.
Yeah, exactly. So I think Zach fills in nicely, like the 70s and 80s for you, Adam, because that's kind of your sweet spot, Zach, right?
Yeah, that's where I'll have my love for, is in the 70s and 80s.
I'm just looking at films. I just did a Google search for 1974 in film, and to be fair, like this year, like I'm not gonna, like, there is definitely better films like The Conversation, Young Frankenstein. Just from the first line here, I'm sure there probably is better films, but I'm not seeing anything here that I love from 1974. The Parallax View was 1974 as well. Yeah, I'm not seeing anything here from 1974 that I love. So, yeah, I'm going to say that's my favorite film of 1974. I'm going to go out on a limb and say that.
Heard it here first.
1974, friend of the podcast, the year 1974.
And that wraps up this week's episode of They Live by Film. You can catch me, Chris, and Zach on our Letterboxd or Reddit accounts, the links of which will be in the description. And don't forget to follow us on Twitter at They Live by Film. Until next time,